Hello everyone and welcome to February's session of Quilters Question Time live question and answers. We are delighted to be with you again. End of February already. It's showing signs of spring. Definitely here. I've got crocuses and snowdrops and other plants in my garden. It's all looking really beautiful. We had a lovely sunny day today, so lots of good things coming weather wise and lots of good things hopefully coming question wise. We have a nice range of questions and comments for you this evening. Though I have to say, we are a little bit earlier than normal. It's a short month, isn't it? February. And so we actually have about half as many questions as we had last month. However, last month was a bit of a bumper crop and we struggled to get through them all. So hopefully this evening we will have plenty of time to chat about all of your queries and give you some really good answers. So I'm going to pass you over to David so that he can find out where you are from this evening.
Hello everybody. Well, lots of people online already. Susan Jenkins, you were first in the line, as quite often you manage to be. Elizabeth Radabor from San Antonio in Texas. Kathy Hiscock, you've got a question in tonight, I think. Jem Potts, who's in Devon this week. Cindy Montgomery from Michigan City. Anne Snellgrove from lovely South Carolina. Who else have we got? I'm just going a bit further down. Joe German is on tonight. Patricia Curtis, I think have you got a question tonight, Patricia? Mandy from Hampshire, Carol Brown from Cornwall, Monique DeCan from Belgium. So we've got a very eclectic mix of people tonight, and I think as long as you can all hear us, you're all saying hello, and we are good to go.
And Peter is somewhere in the building, but I believe he was just cleaning the bath, which is unheard of. But as you know, and I've got to keep going on about it, we've got all this building work going on, and I've been doing a little bit myself and been incredibly gritty and dusty, and apparently left a trail of grit in the bath, which Peter had to clean out. So there's a reversal of roles, I think, with that one. Anyway, I was hoping he was going to make his appearance before I explain to you what this evening's gifts. Oh, right, here he is. What this evening's gifts are. You wanted in a minute. Finish cleaning the bath, Peter?
Yeah.
Okay, so for our lovely quilters, we have two lovely little gifts which you don't have to do anything to be eligible for. You just need to be a paid up member. This is thread for machine quilting. Not to say you couldn't use it by hand, but it is really machine quilting or embroidery. So it's 40 weight shiny polyester. Is actually isocord, and I would use this when I was machine quilting large size quilts, so not miniatures. So 40 weight shiny polyester in the top of the sewing machine with bottom line in the bobbin, and for me maybe a 60 microtex needle, but certainly my suggestion is a 70 is a really good needle to work with this thread. So we've got a nice range of purpley lilac colours which come complete with one or two of my postcards with pictures of my work on, and then some lovely spring greens. So crocus colours actually. All I need is a little bit of golden yellow, isn't it? So Peter, come and draw some numbers out of the bag. And what have you got to tell us today, Peter? Anything exciting?
No.
Okay. Nothing exciting in your world?
Have you seen the purple crocuses in our garden?
Yes, I just mentioned them. I dug, because of this building work, I've been having to move plants around, and I dug up a little lump of bulbs, which it was just this big clod of earth with these little green shoots, and I haven't had a chance to replant it in the garden, but it's at the side of the garden, and it's an absolute blaze of purple, isn't it? It's flowered better being abandoned by the side of the path than it would do normally. So yeah, it's quite stunning. Right, 2 please, Peter.
You've been abandoned by the side of the path.
There's still time, Peter, if I haven't. Thank you.
Right.
So if you've got nothing exciting to tell us, we'll see you towards the end, Peter. Okay, so he's going to pass those numbers over to David. David will match those up with 2 of our members, and we will let you know at the end who has won the lovely thread. So David, question 1 isn't so much a question, is it, as a comment with a beautiful piece of work to admire.
Okay, so yes, we've got several Patricias on tonight on the questions. This one is Pat Jenkins, and I think this one came in around about the time of the last quilter question. I think it just missed last time for some reason. We do have a picture, if I can. Are we ready to go on the picture? So there's the picture. So this is from Patricia Jenkins, or Pat Jenkins anyway. It says, again, I would like to thank you and Philippa for the classes, as I know I would not have tried to do this quilt without all the lessons. They have inspired me to try new skill. Before the lessons I did traditional blocks and only hand quilted, and I forgot about the curves. I have learned to be prepared to change what I think and what I'm going to do as I go along. This included changing the colour and pattern, fabrics I use, and deciding on how I'm going to quilt each part, one area at a time. Thank you again, and keep up the good work. And that's from Pat Jenkins. That looks fantastic, doesn't it, Philippa?
So yes, it is. I'm just going to chat about it, David, for a moment or two, if we could just go back to it. So yeah, loads of fantastic experimental and very detailed work there, Pat. I mean, your central section is very intricately pieced there, and then you've got all of those sawtooth shapes radiating out from your curved petals, and then you've got even curvier curved sections as you move further out. Thank you, David. And then we can see what a range of machine quilting you've got. So you have got straight lines, you've got close together lines, you've got some of your curvy petal shapes, and you've got feathers. So there's the most incredible range, and it has really worked out beautifully. So I'm extremely proud of you and delighted that you felt that you were able to move away from your traditional blocks, tackle those curves and all those different fabrics, and then the big range of stitch designs that you've done in your machine quilting. It is a phenomenal piece of work. You should be extremely proud, and we're delighted that everybody can see that, because it really is special. So well done, and keep going. Experiment, 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 and we can't wait to see what comes next.
Okay, so the next question also has a picture, which by chance I have teed up, and this is from Laura Southwick, and again I think this was a leftover from last time. And Laura says, I'm loving your course. Would Philippa give a bit of help on applique for very pointed shapes such as this, please? And that is quite a point on the end. Philippa, how do we do points that are that pointy?
Well, to get straight to the point, you couldn't resist, could I? Now then, we have quite a range of applique classes in season 1 and into season 2. And in season 1, we have both raw edge applique and turned edge applique, as well as other things. So I would suggest that you look at both of those classes. Now with the turned edge applique, which is what I imagine you are going to do with this, you don't actually say, but it looks to me like you've fused interfacing, very carefully numbered, number 23. I wonder how many of these shapes you've got. Okay, yeah, you fuse that onto a piece of fabric, and there is a large fabric margin around there, so I imagine you are going to cut that out, adding that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you're going to baste it over the edge. So if you go to the turned edge applique class, first of all look at the heart section, how to do a really fabulous point at the bottom of a heart, and I show you how to actually fold the seam allowance in and then actually baste it and press it. So there is that, but also in that class, if you look, I think we've got the little birds with little birds' tails. If I am going to turn something under, I tend to just alter the shape slightly, because the point is so pointy on that there isn't really any place to hide the seam allowance behind it. So I would be slightly curving the tip of that point to make it just a little bit less sharp, so that you had more space. And when I chat about the little bird motifs, I do explain that. If I definitely decide that I do want something that is as pointed as that, I would not do it by turned edge. I would fuse it on and use probably blanket stitch, maybe satin stitch, but an alternative method of doing it so that I wasn't trying to hide the seam allowance behind that sharp point. And again, that is visited in detail in the raw edge applique class. So I always think that you have to choose the method that your applique is going to be according to the shape, and if the shape doesn't suit the method that you've chosen, you need to adapt the shape if you are determined that you want to use a particular method, in this case turned edge. So lots of information in the classes for you, Laura. It is doable, even if you've got 23 or 123, but I personally would just reshape that little tip, make it a little less pointy. In the finished thing, it simply will not be noticed. Nobody's going to be pointing at it and saying, oh, that's not as sharp as it should be. What they're going to look at it and do is be kind of really awed and impressed by how neat the point is and how well you've concealed your seam allowance.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that's helpful, Laura. The next question is from Ruth Farwell, and Ruth wants to do some embroidered blocks for a quilt, and she would like to use linen. And the question that Ruth wants to ask is, does Philippa have any suggestions for the weight and the thread count? I got lost in all the different ways linen is described. Now this is a big question, I'm thinking. Also, is Belgian linen justified since it costs so much more? Philippa, what do we think about linen?
Okay, so Ruth, I wonder where you are in the world. I wonder if you're in the UK or America or perhaps somewhere else as well. What do I think about linen? I like linen very much, and it is a beautiful fabric and one of the best fabrics ecologically to produce. So it doesn't require masses of water to actually grow or to process it. So it is really nice from that point of view. It's hard wearing. If you have bought our fibres, fabrics and filaments class, you can learn a lot more about linen from that class, so it might be worth revisiting it. But it does, like cotton and wool and other fibres and fabrics, come in many different weights. So you can have very sheer linen fabric, very gauzy, in the same way you can have very sheer cotton fabric, or you can have a very heavy duty upholstery weight linen fabric that would be suitable for chairs and cushions and covering sofas, that kind of thing. So a big range. And generally, when you are not able to actually be in a shop and you're just trying to buy this online without being able to feel the product, you will be given the weight of the linen, and it will be grams per square metre, and you will usually see GSM, okay, grams per square metre. So I've just made a little note here to make sure I don't tell you this incorrectly, but a sheer linen would be probably between about 80 to 150 grams per square metre, whereas a heavy curtaining linen fabric might be 250 to 300 or more grams per square metre. So I would say that Ruth wants to be somewhere in the middle of that range. She doesn't want anything really sheer, she doesn't want anything too heavy, so she's probably going to be looking at 150 to perhaps 250. I mean, wherever possible, it is a really good idea to get a little swatch, a sample, so that you can see it. However, I do want to just caution you there, because the actual threads that make up the fabric can vary a lot, and the fabric can weigh the same, and it can be quite misleading. So let me explain that further. You might have a lot of very fine threads making up the fabric, and so there are many fine threads per inch, yeah, in both the warp and the weft, and that would give you a lightweight, very fluid fabric. But you might have much thicker threads and fewer of them making up the fabric, which would give you a heavier weight, less pliable fabric, and then both might be of a similar weight. So you're right to be a bit kind of confused really, because it doesn't really give you so much of an idea just knowing that figure. So as I say, a swatch is probably your best bet with that. In terms of, is Belgian linen better and worth a higher price than other types of linen? Well, linen is grown in certain areas of the world, but not all. So Ireland was very famous for its linen up until relatively recently. Obviously Belgium, East European countries have the right climate to grow the flax plant. What I would say is that I would think that Belgian linen, like linen from anywhere else, can vary in its quality according to how well it's been grown. The particular climatic conditions in that year might make a difference, the type of soil and so on. I suspect that Belgian linen is probably more expensive than perhaps some other producing companies, because Belgium is a company that gives high wages. You know, it will be more expensive to produce in a country that has a high standard of living as opposed to a country that has a lower standard of living. So again, I don't think always that price is the best guide in knowing what's the best linen to buy. So yeah, I can't say yes it is and no it isn't. You might find less expensive linen of an equal quality, and you might find expensive linen of a poorer quality. So it is a bit of a minefield really, but good luck with your research, and do try and get some swatches, and don't forget the fibres, fabrics and filament class for more information on linen and lots of other fibres and threads.
Okay, well I happen to know that Ruth Farwell has got that fibres, fabrics and
did you just check?
filaments, so she
All
has
right.
that. She's in the US and she has that class, so Ruth, you will be able to watch that. Monique DeCan says, of course Belgian linen is the best, but then
Yeah.
you need to know that Monique lives in Belgium, and we probably, some of our Irish members would probably suggest that the Irish linen is the best, so I'm not going to get involved in that. I'm just reporting back what comments.
Could I just, that's just to encourage me to think about something else actually. Yes, so that if you are using Belgian linen that is being imported into the States, it's going to have import duties on it. Well, we shouldn't really talk about import and export duties, should we? But it is going to have that. So just another thought came to me, and you often find French second-hand old French sheets, which might be of a very good quality. So they are worth looking out for if you want white, or if you like to dye your own fabrics. That's often a really economical way to buy your linen.
Okay, top tips there from Philippa, thank you. So the next question is from Sue Roberts, and Sue says, I'm planning a double bed quilt for my next project. As I cannot machine quilt it because it's too big, and I'm sure Philippa might have something to say about that. As I cannot machine quilt it because it's too big, I would like to try a quilt as you go method. Which is your preferred and the simplest way to achieve quilt as you go? And that's from Sue Roberts.
It's interesting, Sue, because that is a question that gets asked quite often. It comes up from time to time, quilt as you go, and we've never done a class on it. And I have to say to you, I have never made a quilt by the quilt as you go method. And for those of you perhaps new to quilting and don't know what that is, you make sections of the quilt and you put all the layers together, so the backing and the wadding or batting and the quilt top, and you do some quilting, and then you join the sections together. Now, I have to say to you that I think the most important thing in terms of machine quilting large pieces of work is having your sewing machine set down into a table, as I've got here. But I have made quilts up to 108 inches square using an old Bernina sewing machine of the small size. For those of you that have got older machines, I worked on a 1260, which has a very small throat paste, and I just rammed the quilt in and flattened out the area that I was working on. And what I think is advantageous is the smaller the design that you are doing, which is what particularly suits me, the less you're having to travel with your free motion work across the quilt before you're moving it and adjusting to the next place. So, but that's not really answering your question, is it? Again, I don't know the design that you are doing, and whether it's applique or whether it's lots of piecing with lots of seams coming up to the edge. But what my suggestion is that your quilt as you go, it's going to appear as though you have put sashing between each of the individual blocks. So what I think I would probably do, and again I would do some sampling to try this out, and again if any of our members do successfully do quilt as you go, we would be very grateful for your input. However, what I would do is I would make the individual sections so that they had a generous seam allowance, particularly on the sides where I want to join them to another section of the quilt. And I think you can quilt right up to the edge really. What I would tend to do is I would tend to actually sew the thing together with, you can do this either way, but I would tend to sew it so that I was putting the back of the quilt together, and I would sew the seams to join the two sections together so that the seam would be uppermost on the right side. Now what I would then be doing is, before I actually trimmed any of the excess fabric away, I would actually press the seam open with steam under a damp cloth on a flat surface, making sure that all of the quilt was really well supported so that I wasn't distorting it and I was getting a nice straight line with my pressing. Okay, and then I would trim down to, I might not trim 1/4 of an inch, it a little bit depends on the look that you want on the right side, but the wider the seam allowance, the more it'll kind of stay flat really. If you have a very narrow seam allowance, even when you've pressed it open, it can tend to kind of pop up and create a little ridge, whereas if you've got a relatively wide seam allowance, it might stay a little bit flatter. Now if there wasn't a ton of quilting going into that seam allowance, I would sit with my work on the table and I would clip the wadding away. I would kind of get between the layers and I would clip bits of wadding away so that I was reducing the bulk. And then what I would tend to do is, either with a zigzag or with a straight stitch on either side of the sewn seam, I would sew that seam allowance down so that it was held flat. Okay, and so then I've got a nice flat seam allowance on the right side, and then I would put a strip of fabric that's had the ends folded under, so it could be a bias strip that you could buy or you could make, yeah, and then I would sew that over with just a regular straight stitch as close to the edge as I could get without falling off the edge. But you could put a decorative stitch down the edge as well and incorporate another design. You could use the triple stitch with a nice shiny polyester thread. In some of the classes I've talked about the 7 stitch that goes forward and backwards 7 times and gives a fantastic finish with a beautiful thread, quite a long stitch length. So I'd be playing around with that kind of idea. So don't expect that it's going to be really fast if it's going to be effective and you're going to make something of it. It is going to take time, but it is going to be easier to handle than getting the whole thing through the sewing machine. But as I said, if anybody's got other advice, we would love to hear it.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Kathy Hiscock, and there's a picture which I'll pop up shortly. Kathy says it's taken huge courage to send this photo of the miniature quilt I've just finished following Philippa's brilliant class. I've never made a miniature before, so it's a big first for me, and it should be subtitled A Lesson in Perseverance, Patience, Damage Limitation, Determination and Derangement. So it sounds like you've had fun there, Kathy. Sounds like you've had a lot of fun. Anyway, Kathy says her question is actually about the raw edge applique. And let's put the picture up. So there is Kathy's miniature which she has done, and for those of you that have done the class, you will be able to recognise that instantly as being from Philippa's miniature class. She says it's actually about the raw edge applique. I've done a fair bit of this and love doing it, so I was looking forward to it as it was towards the end of the project. But I use heat bond fusible again, which I've used happily many times, but in this project I had to stitch one stitch only and stop, and then stitch the next one and stop, because otherwise it would bring up loose floppy threads and the thread would bunch up and come out of the needle. So annoying. I stopped and rethreaded the machine, both the bobbin and the top, several times. I use a Microtex needle, new at the point of sewing the applique. I've never had this before. The yellow pieces which I sewed first weren't as bad. It was the dots that caused the most distress. I can't blame it on the small stitch size, because I've done smaller to create the satin stitch quite happily in the past. What could be the problem? Philippa, can you help Kathy Hiscock? Have you got any ideas as to what might be going on?
So it's always really interesting reading and hearing. I mean, David often doesn't read out everything that he said, and what he didn't read out there is that "they're so annoying" was in capitals. I'm surprised it wasn't in bold and underlined, so clearly that frustrated you. And also, in the end, I just had to finish it as best I could because it had driven me more than a bit bonkers. Okay, we love the word bonkers, don't we? Well, before I address that, I just want to say what a lovely job you've done. It does look really fabulous, and all of the elements do look beautifully considered. Your fabric choices look really great. It's very dramatic and strong, even though it is a miniature quilt. It's an extremely successful piece of work. So I definitely know that you should be very proud of what you have achieved, but what we don't want you to have is frustration. So I've thought quite hard about this, really, because it's interesting that you had the problem when you were sewing the circles, but not really when you were sewing the curved sections. That is correct, isn't it? So the little orangey yellow curved sections, I don't believe you had the problem with that, but on the smaller purple and turquoise circles you did. Now, what you don't tell us is what was the thread that you were using, and I imagine that you are using a finer thread than you may have used in the past. So from memory, I think I was using silk thread, which is a 100-weight fine silk thread in the top of the sewing machine and bottom line in the bobbin. You may have had tension issues. I think that's extremely likely, especially in the bobbin, because the finer the thread is, the more easily it runs through the tension discs, both top and bottom. So you do need to tighten the tension to give it a little bit of a grip, you know, to just hold that thread back a little bit as you were sewing to stop it sliding through. So I do think that that is perhaps the most likely thing with your kind of issue that you had. And I think that it may be more apparent on the small curves, because as you are turning with each stitch, maybe there's something in that action that encourages a kind of looseness of the thread. But I really do think it's probably to do with a fine thread and your tension. So I would be interested to know, Kathy, whether you were using a fine thread and whether you had adjusted the tension or not. It also, yeah, I mean, the actual adhesive product shouldn't really make any difference to it at all. Sometimes it is helpful if you have something like tearaway stabilizer on the wrong side of the work, because it just gives there's a little bit more grippy and there's a little bit more substance to it, especially on these very fine pieces. So that might be something to consider in the future. But I would like to just have a little bit more information on that. And I guess the problem with miniatures is that they are so small, people have to get up close to see them, and then all the imperfections are all too glaringly obvious. Not at all, Kathy. It's beautiful. And just think all the things you learn in the making of that quilt. So very well done.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Hopefully you've got some of that. I know you said hello earlier on, so I know you're listening. So if you've got any other information you want to pop on the comments, I will be reading them. We've got some feedback on the Quilt As You Go. Kathy Quantrill says she has done Quilt As You Go. There's some excellent videos on YouTube. But she
don't tell them about YouTube.
But she says,
come on.
But she says, well, for Quilt As You Go, but she said she used an ordinary sewing machine for a quilt about 100 inches square, which is what Philippa was saying.
Yeah.
So that's fine. There were a couple of other messages about places you might go for Quilt As You Go, but they've both been retracted. So they've been self-censored. So so that's fine. Okay, the next question is from Susan Harris. And Susan says, thank you for all the detailed lessons. I have learned a lot. However, Philippa and I had a real chuckle about this one. I've learned a lot. However, the lightning bolt moment for me was the use of a lint roller. Who knew that the lint roller was going to have such an impact? I have many, but since the death of our cat, I haven't had a lot of use for them. Now they have a new lease of life thanks to your suggestion of cleaning up with them. I don't have a designated sewing area, so I move rooms, leaving a trail of threads and snippets of fabric behind me, unless I buzz round with the cordless vac. I'm seriously excited. Thank you again for sharing your knowledge, and particularly for the lightning bolt moment of the lint roller.
So Susan, that did really make us chuckle, because of all the things that are included in the class, all the sort of teaching things, that the lint roller is the thing that really chimed with you. But I think that's really fantastic, isn't it? I mean, I was using one today. I use it all the time. I only clean my ironing board with it if it looks a bit dusty. They're invaluable. And what's also nice from your point of view is that every time you get that out, you'll think of your lovely cat. So it has a kind of double meaning for you, which is great. So thank you for that, Susan. We always like to hear what really worked for you. It makes a lovely little addition.
Okay, so the next question is from Judy Daly, and Judy says, I like to hand quilt. I just put an antique tulip pattern together, pattern top together. The bottom is plain muslin. I presume that she means muslin. Can I hand quilt the top and batting and then tie the backing on? What do you think?
So Judy, as I always say, it's your piece of work. You can do what the heck you like. So it really is entirely up to you. Now, we don't have a picture of the quilt top, but I imagine it is a fairly traditional but very beautiful tulip pattern, which is perfect for the time of year. Tulips coming along. So the bottom is plain muslin, and that's just a plain cotton fabric. I'm pretty sure Judy will be in the States, so for the Brits we don't tend not to use that term for quilting fabrics, but just a standard plain cotton. And yes, hand quilting is a bit tough on your hands, isn't it? So the fewer layers that you are sewing through, the easier that's going to be and the faster it's going to go. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. What I think you really need to ensure is that you're going to quilt the top and the middle section, the batting or the wadding, together, and then you're going to put the backing on. You are going to need to anchor it quite well so that you don't get these kind of floppy pockets of nothingness floating around on the back of the quilt. And so by tying it, I imagine that you mean the standard method where you take something like an embroidery thread, thickish threads, and you go through all the layers from the top. You bring both raw ends of the thread to the top and you knot them. I mean, I would incorporate that into some kind of a design. So instead of just knotting kind of regularly at so many inches in a horizontal and vertical fashion, I might kind of follow some of the lines in your applique design and create another feature with your tying, perhaps around the flowers or some kind of a circular shape or something like that, so that you make it look like a really deliberate decision as part of the design, not just in terms of practicality. So yes, let's see it when it's done, Judy. Now, I'm just going to tell them a little bit about my day yesterday, David.
Yes, please
I think
do.
we've got time, haven't we?
Yeah.
So I was approached by a lady who I know through quilting, who is actually a teacher at a very select school, which is a school of only between 50 and 60 students, teenagers. So in the UK from year 7 upwards, so that is 11, 12 and so on, to these children have perhaps behavioural or mental health issues, or really don't manage to thrive in a regular mainstream school situation. And their project, they have got some funding to make a textile piece of work to go into our main art gallery in Hull, which is the Ferrans Art Gallery, and it's a really fantastic art gallery. It really punches above its weight. If you're ever in the area, it's really well worth going to. And so I was invited to go in and do some work periodically over the school year with about half a dozen students. The class sizes are between 4 and 6 students, but I actually had a double class when I went in yesterday, so I had 10 students. And what we are doing is there was some very, very robust defences built by Henry VIII in Hull in 1541 to 43 to defend Hull, which is on the river. So basically it was to defend against the French, who were going to sail up the North Sea and down the Humber and attack Hull, and then hopefully invade Yorkshire. And so the footprint of this building, the foundations are being excavated. It was demolished about 200 years ago, and so we're using this footprint for our main design, and then we're adding lots of other elements. But it was the most interesting day, and I haven't managed to stop thinking about it really. First of all, I was really worried about going, because the lady Fiona, the teacher, was saying, well, if they don't like the look of you, they'll just leave the class, but don't take it personally. Well, fortunately nobody really left, but one child did sleep for the entire hour and a half in a corner, and then there were other children who will kind of listen, but they don't want to do any practical work. And then there were other children who were really keen on doing the practical work. And so I had one young man who did absolutely nothing until the last 10 minutes, where he suddenly produced this amazing floral. It was actually a Tudor rose that we were doing in 3D fabric that he kind of got together in 10 minutes, which was amazing. Had another young man who sat diligently sewing in the most beautiful way for all of the practical part of the class, but he wouldn't take any instruction, and he was tall and he had a length of thread to sew some beads on, and I said, we can have it shorter than that, and he was saying, no, I like to have it really long, I don't want to run out. And then there was another young lady who didn't want to do any of the sewing, and she was really kind of weighing me up for quite a while, and then she decided that was okay, and she said to me, oh, your lipstick, it looks really, I've never seen anybody that wears red lipstick that it looks good on, but yours looks really good. And then she said, oh, and I like your fingernails. And then she said to me, you look like you're dressed to work on a farm. She said, but in a good way. So it was really interesting. So I'm to go back again several times, but not too soon, because they only have kind of 45-minute lessons. So in about 3 weeks or so, I shall go and see how they're progressing and carry on with some advice. But I'll have to think of another outfit to go in so that I don't look like a farmer.
Okay, so that was obviously a fun day yesterday. Lots to think about.
Fun, yeah. It
Not
was
fun.
It was really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
An interesting day.
The reason that I kind of wanted to do it really was that, it's very good, isn't it, to push yourself beyond your comfort level, really. I know loads about teaching people who actually want to learn and pay to come and learn from it, but teaching kids who perhaps don't want to be there is a different thing. And just to see, what was possible and what we could do, and have a greater understanding of these children. And a thing that I forgot to say was that there were people popping in and out the whole time. It was a very kind of busy environment. Yeah, it was. But every child, and these were not the children that I was dealing with, that I met, said hello to me and also said, oh, I haven't seen you here before. So they genuinely felt like they had ownership of this place, and they were very comfortable in their environment, and they were proud of the place that they went to school. So it did have a very nice kind of inclusive atmosphere that did genuinely seem to be working for the children, which was really nice to see.
I think we're all going to have to go and take a trip to the Ferrens Art Gallery now. When's it going to be finished? For the summer, is it?
Yes.
For the summer. So those of you near Hull, trip to Ferrens Art Gallery is in the making. To have a look at that. Okay, Kathy Hiscock, who of the miniature that we were talking about earlier on, she said she did use silky thread for some of the project, but also Gutterman 50 weight thread for some of the applique, which she says she knows wasn't recommended. And swapping between the different weights might have been the problem, and I guess that might have been where the tension problems came from.
Yes, and what was her mixed top and bottom? So we can maybe address that again in another session.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for that feedback, Kathy. Okay, the next question is from Maren Rents from El Hierro, which I think is in Spain. I'm guessing Spain. Maren, you'll have to let Portugal. Or might be Portugal. Yeah. You'll have to let me know. So Maren says, "Dear Philippa, the classes are just delightful. The sewing machine savvy was a revelation. I wish I'd seen this at the beginning of my sewing career. It could have saved me from a lot of frustration. Still so much input that I will listen to it many more times." Now, Maren says her question concerns raw edge applique. For embroidery and thread painting, I started to use soluble fleece because with tearaway I always had distorted stitches. Does this not happen with the tearaway stabiliser, or did I just use the wrong products? Or maybe it was the cotton thread. I use cotton and polyester and can't remember if it happened with both, or perhaps it was the tension. And then just as an aside, she says that her adopted dog that she adopted just 10 days ago loves listening to the classes as well, and she sent us a picture of her adopted dog sleeping in the corner, very content, with Philippa explaining lots of things about quilting in the background. So Philippa, raw edge applique, what do we think?
Well, I think David's been a bit kind there to me, really, because I think the message there is that the dog is lulled to sleep by my voice. so I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or the dog finds me incredibly. But yes, yeah, I did have a student who told me that every time she watched me online, it sent her to sleep, and I did find that a little distressing. But anyway, right. So raw edge applique and what type of stabilizer? So soluble fleece stabilizer in the UK, and I don't know if it's the same in the States, but it's made by Vilene, and the actual product is called Solu Fleece. I don't think that you should get the idea that it has a really high loft. I'm not quite sure why they've chosen the name fleece in that sense, because it isn't a big puffy product, but it is a supporting element to stabilize the stitches as you do them. Now then, I most often use tearaway stabilizer, don't I, rather than water soluble, because I often use a lot of my own hand dyed fabrics, and I'm always a little bit worried that the hand dyed fabric will bleed to some degree if I wet it, once, to remove water soluble stabilizer, which is why I tend to go with the tearaway stabilizer. However, what I wonder is if Maren is referring to the tearaway stabilizer distorting the stitches when you actually remove it. And if you think about thread painting and a lot of embroidery, it's a lot of kind of wide thrown stitches, so big floats on the right side of the fabric, and just the action of tearing the stabilizer away may distort those stitches if you're not kind of holding on to the stitches as you carefully ease it away. So I hope I'm correct in understanding that's what the problem was when the tearaway stabilizer was used, which is why a washable is better for that type of work, because it's not going to distort as the stabilizer is removed. I'm not really generally doing that type of work. I'm tending to do things like triple stitch, 7 stitch, and even blanket stitch, which doesn't distort in the same way when you are removing the stabilizer. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong choice there. It's whatever works for the particular thing that you are doing. So I've explained why I use what I use, and I've explained why I think for Maren the wash away is more suitable for the type of work that she's doing. So as with all these things, try it, use the one that works best for you. The best one is the one that does the best job.
Okay, sorry, busy trying to do some background research there. Okay, hopefully that helps you, Maren. The next question is from Chris Allington, and Chris says, a question for Philippa. I'm gradually getting better at free motion quilting using Philippa's tips on a practice quilt sandwich. But how do you manage the bulk of a full-size quilt, especially in the machine quote? So this is a question kind of linked to the question we had earlier, especially the middle bits if they're a large quilt. What do we think about that, Philippa?
Yeah, so we have touched on this briefly, Chris, previously, and so I did explain that many of my very large quilts were made on a much smaller sewing machine than this, but what I explained was that having the sewing machine set down into the table is the most important thing, because the work is supported. Now when I put the work into the sewing machine, I don't have it all spread out flat. It is bunched up, so it'll be bunched all the way around the throat plate of the sewing machine, but also on my knee it will be held lightly. And so particularly with those big ones, I was just pushing it all in under the arm there to get to the middle and just flattening out that small area in the center. And what I explained to you was that the smaller the design is that you are stitching, the less distance you are covering, the easier it is just to move that small section. And I know that in our free motion classes do have a look, but I show how I use the gripper in different ways. So it's that non-slip mat that comes on a roll for putting on trays, that kind of thing in your kitchen. And I cut pieces about 4 by 6 inches. And when it is a large quilt, what I tend to do is just have my left hand flat with the gripper, but I'm pinching a section of the quilt with my right hand so that I've got kind of hold of it. I tend not to pinch both sides, but sometimes I do. I mean, I do different things. So I think that really having a good setup and not trying to cover large distances on the piece of work that you are doing is really the key. Having a chair of the right height, sitting squarely so your nose is in line with the needle, trying not to be tense. And what I also chat about is that from the needle point to the front of the table is quite a large amount of table. It's about 11 or so inches. My entire forearm rests on the table, so I'm much more in control and much more relaxed. And even if my elbows are off the table, there's a very different feeling to how you control the work and how comfortable you are if your entire forearm is resting on the table. And the other thing that I think is really important is one of those Supreme slider type Teflon mats that temporarily adheres to the bed of your sewing machine but gives you a really smooth slidey surface. It really does help the work to move through the sewing machine more freely. So do visit the free motion class to find out more about that, because I do chat about that in those classes. It really is about what you're prepared to kind of put up with, and I am very determined, and I was going to do that. And now, you know, I do have the facility of a bigger space under the sewing machine.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that is helpful. So the next question is from Amanda, and Amanda says, hi Philippa and David, I hope you're both well. This unfinished quilt has been hanging around for 2 years now because I just don't know how to quilt it. And we have a picture for you to look at, or a couple of pictures, a close up and a further back one. There are so many seams and very small pieces. I've done a bit of in the ditch quilting, so far. I think my previous machine struggled with the layers, but I've just bought a new Bernina 475. So I've now got a bit more oomph. I'm a novice when it comes to free motion quilting, but any advice would be fab. Thank you so much. And that's from Amanda Mead.
So Amanda's very excited about that new sewing machine, as she should be. Whatever brand you buy, a new sewing machine is always really exciting. And I don't know what you had before, Amanda, but the Berninas do have a very strong motor, and they will take and deal with layers and heavy pieces of work in a way that some sewing machines struggle with. So I do hope that that is going to really feel like a game changer for you. So you don't really say whether you want to do some free motion or you'd prefer to do straight line stitching with your quilting. So I'm going to suggest you do perhaps a little bit of both. And if you look at our Quilt as Desired class, which is in season 2, and if you don't have it, you can buy it as a single class. It gives you an awful lot of information and ideas of where to go in terms of how do I decide how to quilt this particular piece of work. And if we can just go back to the image, if you don't mind, please, David. So if we look at the image on the right hand side and the lower circle there, in the pink area you can see some beautiful hand stitching in a triangular or pointed shape that echoes some of the design work that you have already got going on. Now I think that is just perfect, and so you could replicate that by machine, and again you could you don't have to use the same color thread. So for example, it looks as though you have that repeated section with quite a large pink area on several of the blocks. So you know, some of them could be done by hand, you could mix it up, some of them could be done by machine. You could add, for example, a green thread if you're going to do it by machine, so that you were repeating a design, but you've been a bit clever about how you actually achieved that to create more interest. I mean, and look at what you've got there. So you've got quite a lot of curved, so that you could put curved shaping in. So if you refer back to the little miniature quilt that we were looking at earlier in the session, there's some just curved lines around similar shapes, and they are really, really effective. You could try a little bit of stippling. You know, stippling is a great stitch to kind of really hone your free motion skills, and some of those plain areas between your circular sections are ideal for that, and you could vary that by the different coloured threads. So for example, where you've got plain green there, you could go with a self plain green, but in a section next to it you could put pink stippling in it, that kind of thing. So look at what you've got and take what you have already got and take those elements and use them, and just decide, I'm just going to learn stippling in this one. That's what I did. Got really good at stippling, and then stretched that to stippling and leaves, and then added flowers and added so on. So just take it step by step, and I do think a lovely mix of hand and machine will really enhance this piece of work even further.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully you've got some good ideas there, Amanda. Now the next question is from Barbara Hartness, and Barbara's sent in a couple of questions, so we'll roll these together. So this is questions 11 and 13, Philippa.
Okay.
So first of all, Barbara, and I don't think I've got this teed up because we've just had one picture on, but Barbara has sent us a picture which I will show you, and she says, I'm sending you a photo of my piece from your precision piecing class, and those of us who've taken the precision piecing class will recognise that block. The next one will be even better. What a difference the bottom line thread and the silk thread makes. And the Microtex needle. My machine ran so much smoother. I have several fabrics pulled for making several more of this blocks. And now Barbara then asks the question, I'll come back to me, if I were making a baby quilt, would you still use the 60 weight bottom line and the 100 weight silk, or would you use something different? And Barbara says she needs to order some more thread, and she also says, can she use the bottom line for the top thread also? So a couple of thread questions there for you, Philippa.
Yes, and we often get thread questions, and it is such a big area to really delve into. So I know I've already said it this evening, but the fibres, fabric and filaments class does give you a lot of information on that. Now, I have used many threads over the years and tried out lots of different things, and I am absolutely not saying that you should do what I say. I'm going to explain to you why I do what I do, and I do talk about this in the classes. I am not a big fan of cotton thread. I find it inelastic, linty. It's not as strong as polyester thread. I can have a finer, stronger polyester thread, which is going to give me less bulk. Cotton thread tends to be quite bulky, so I tend not to use it, but I know some quilters really love it. And if you are going to use a cotton thread, I would suggest a 50/2. That is a relatively fine thread. It is what the Orifil thread is, but I did use cotton thread when I lived in Saudi. I used to use a 50/2 DMC thread actually when I lived in Saudi, because I could actually buy it in Saudi and there was very little that you could get there, but I much prefer a polyester thread because it's finer, it's stronger, it's more elastic, it's lint free. I can get much crisper results in my piecing because I don't have bulk of thread. And so in the bobbin I use bottom line, which is Superior Threads. It's a 60 weight polyester, and I do say, and I have used it in the past in the top and in the bottom of my sewing machine. I sew quite slowly, but a lot of students and people find that the bottom line isn't happy going through the top of the sewing machine and the needle, and it tends to shred, which is why I then decided to use silk in the top and bottom line in the bobbin. So it's 100 weight silk in the top, also Superior Threads, the kimono silk range. I mean, what we are repeatedly hearing, and we just heard from Barbara then, is bottom line in the bobbin and the 100 weight silk in the top is a game changer. We get that comment a lot, don't we? Yeah. In combination with a fine microtex needle. However, it's expensive thread. This bottom line is not so bad, but the silk thread is expensive, and it is perhaps not as strong as just regular polyester thread. So where do you go? So for Barbara's children's or baby quilt, I suggest that she sticks with polyester top and bottom, but if she goes to, now which one of these is it? It's this one, I believe. This is I've got them all. This is extra fine. This is Gutterman's extra fine M202. So I wouldn't be using Gutterman Sew-All. That's really what I consider to be a garment making thread. It's too thick, it's too strong, it's too robust. You don't need that for quilt making and piecing. That is, the Gutterman Sew-All is 100 weight. The extra fine M202 is 150 weight, so it's much finer. So for a baby quilt, top and bottom, that is going to give you the strength, but the fineness, the elasticity, the lint free quality that I like for piecing. So I would suggest that you use that, because these are expensive, not so robust, and you know it's going to be washed a lot. There's a huge range of Gutterman polyester threads, and I would encourage you to look at their website. So here the yellow one is Maraflex, which is a stretch thread. So if you were doing t-shirt quilts, something like that, that's a really good option for that kind of thing. They have a recycled thread made from recycled plastic bottles, because it's the same polymer that makes thread and those plastic bottles. That is a little bit thicker than the super fine one, but it is available. And then this one is a Metler thread, and it's Metrocene, and that is a very fine polyester thread, similar to the extra fine one. So do some experimentation and find those finer polyester threads for work where you want a little bit more robustness, and you don't want to spend quite the amount on the silk thread that you would have to if you were purchasing the kimono silk. Thank you, David.
Okay, so last couple of questions, and then we will have the winners of the prize draw. So the next question is from Patricia Kendall, and Patricia has made, or she's been doing a technical exercise, and here is her. Well, this isn't the quilt. This is her fabric that she's laid out, the squares. She's alternating white and coloured squares, and the squares are 2.5 inch, 2 inch finished. The final size will be 6 foot square. Thus far, the white and coloured squares are sewn together. And her question is, what is the best way to join it all together? And then we've also got a picture of what she's done so far. So that is the picture of how far she has got. Philippa, how would you be going about assembling these squares?
Okay, so it's looking really great, and your piecing looks perfect. You look like you've got fantastic matching with all of those squares there. So that's not just about good sewing, that is also about very accurate cutting out at the very first stage. So well done, it's looking great, Patricia. I don't think there are any rules on this at all. It really is entirely up to you. So the first thing I'm going to say is, it is your choice whether you press to the dark or whether you press the seams open. I personally would prefer the seams pressed open, because when I'm doing my machine quilting, there's less of a kind of difference and there's less bulk for the sewing machine foot to get stuck on, which does happen, and you get small stitches and then regular stitches when you actually get off the thicker area. So I tend to press open, but that is absolutely your choice. I have done everything. So I have joined ribbon, so just made strips and sewn those all together, and I've done it in sections, almost like blocks. I think it's easier to handle if you kind of treat it like blocks, really, so rather than sewing row after row after row and then assembling rows, you do blocks. But what I always do is I work sort of from the outside to the middle, and then I don't keep going. I would work from the other outside to the middle, and then I'm not making it bigger and bigger and bigger, am I? I am getting it to the half size and then working on the other side, and then doing that final seam to join the two together. I'd be personally pinning the heck out of it using the very fine clover glass headed pins, and then pressing with steam on a very flat surface. So no rules at all on that, whatever suits you and how your brain sees that going together in the easiest, nicest, fastest way.
Okay, thank you. Right, so the last question tonight is from Diane Wilkes. Diane says, I'm currently working on a quilt that I might enter into the Festival of Quilts, depending on how it turns out. And she wants to experiment with invisible thread. There are quite a few on the market. Has Philippa got any suggestions for which invisible thread to use on a domestic machine, please? So, Diane, very early on I used invisible thread, and then I stopped using invisible thread because it's not my favourite thing, and I really like all the colours that you can use in thread. However, it does have its place, and my students tell me that Superior Thread's invisible thread is the best by far. So that is the information that I am passing on to you, and I hope that that works really well for you and that we get to see your quilt at the Festival of Quilts with its beautiful stitching done in Superior Thread's invisible thread. So good luck with that, and let us know if you do put it into the show. So nice one to finish on. So yeah, we have to wait until August for that, but it will fly by. So Peter, please come and tell us who our lucky winners are of our beautiful threads, our crocus coloured threads.
They are Jindra Leary and Julia, both J's today, Julia Candy.
Okay, so the two J's, Jindra and Julia, that's a really good name for like a clothing brand or something, isn't it? Yeah, or you could be Leary and Candy, that would also work. You are the two lucky winners of our thread. David will be messaging you to find out your postal address, and then we will get those sent off to you. So congratulations to both of you. Do keep your eye on your inbox, and if nothing arrives, check your spam, spam, because we would like those two threads to get to you. We are always quite surprised how often the gifts are not claimed, which it does really, it floors us really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So that people don't claim them. So thank you, all of you, for your questions. I hope that the answers that you were hoping for did come your way and that you've received the help that you need. As always, experimentation is the key. Yes, I can help you, but you need to try things out to see what works for you and that project with the fabric and the threads that you have got. So until we see you in March, which will come quickly, I am sure, we wish you lots of successful sewing and really getting those projects done before you move out into the garden for your summer of gardening, because we do know it's very seasonal. As a gardener myself, there's something kind of almost, what is the word that I'm looking for? No, well, it's not, it's kind of, it's inbuilt. Thank you. Primeval is the word. It's kind of a need to get outside when the birds start tweeting and the weather gets warmer and the plants start pushing through. So, from Peter.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for all your help today, Peter. And from David.
Bye-bye.
And thank you for all your help today, David. And from me.
Thank you for all your help.
Yes, yeah, we look forward to chatting with you again at the end of May. So from all of us, bye-bye.